Hello there. Welcome to the Saroid channel wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. What a fabulous story we have tonight. A family is woken up in the middle of the night by a loud banging. And they discover it's their next door neighbour, a woman called Anita Sanderson, who has told them about how she went to the chicken coop, hearing the chickens squawking and expecting to encounter a fox, but she didn't encounter a fox. She encountered a creature which many of us would probably call a dogman. She described it as a wolfman of some kind. She was so terrified. This creature blocked her way so she couldn't get into the kitchen. So she ran through the woods to get to her neighbour's house in order to get some kind of sanctuary. But this thing gave her chase, and she is describing her encounter with this creature. So let's continue with the story, but before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with part 2 of our story tonight. Anita Sanderson paused for a moment, as if trying to compose herself, and then she continued, describing the creature she had encountered. When I saw him, I screamed. He was the most terrifying beast I have ever beheld. He really did remind me of a real-life werewolf, you know. I couldn't get back into the house by way of the kitchen, for he was blocking my path. I couldn't go to the barn to hide. The door was locked. I tried to fire at this wolf-like creature, but I realized to my horror there were no bullets left in my rifle. I completely forgot to load it. I'm absolutely useless with firearms, and I'm simply terrified to use one anyway. I can't believe I was so stupid. If the rifle had been loaded, I could have shot at this thing. He'd have lightly bolted, and I could have locked myself back in the house very safely, and prayed to God that this thing would never come back, or cause any further carnage with my chickens. Well, after I took aim at this wolf-like humanoid, and nothing happened with the rifle, the creature began to give me chase. I think it realized my husband's rifle was pretty useless and was not going to harm him at all. And I rather suspect I'd provoked him to anger, for I'd attempted to kill him or at the very least scare him away. So he wanted revenge, I suppose. I don't know this for sure, of course, but I did sense he was irate. There was nothing I could do but run straight into the woods as fast as I could, as there was nowhere left for me to go, and the only place I thought of was going to your farmhouse. Badger was going ballistic inside the kitchen, barking like crazy and scratching the door frantically. I think he must have smelt this thing a mile away, because it stank to high heaven of what I can only describe as a very bad yeast infection, mixed with the smell of a dead rat rotting in an alleyway or something. I decided the only thing to do was to run straight to your farmhouse by way of the woods. I knew it was the one place I could find sanctuary, which was why I began banging on your door so hard in the early hours of the morning, and I do apologize for that. Anyway, while the creature was giving me chase, I wasn't sure whether this thing would get me or not. It was so close behind me. I could hear it snorting and breathing heavily. I had my torch with me, but it was so dark in the woods. And when you're running for your life, you fall over burgeoning roots that trip you up when you can't see properly. I was in such a frenzied panic, I thought I was already dead. This thing, there's no way to describe it, he was so incredibly agile, very nimble on his feet. My legs, on the other hand, felt like cement blocks beneath me. It was like they'd become uselessly heavy and inefficient, and were weighing me down. So it was almost as if I was wading through water as I ran. But then against all the odds, I think the adrenaline just suddenly shot through my system very quickly, and I began to run like a March hare. I didn't dare look behind me. Even though I was trying to get to your farmhouse through the labyrinths of trees at the dead of night, my visibility was badly distorted. Everything was hazy and obscure, and indefinite, you could say. I couldn't see where I was going, and I was pretty sure I was beginning to run around in circles. I did feel rather like a cornered animal, because I was getting ensnared by thorny briars and extended tree branches that seemed to reach out and grab me, as if they too wanted to wrestle me to the ground. One of those branches, I have to say, almost took my eye out. But by that point, I didn't care at all. All I could think about was wanting to survive, especially for my children and husband's sake. If this thing had got me, well, my family might never know what had happened to me," said Anita, beginning to whimper. "Imagine how my husband would be, without a wife and kids, without a mother. Just the thought, I cannot bear it. I'm telling you, I would have died tonight. No one would have known what had happened to me if that thing, that grotesque thing, hadn't been stopped in its tracks. I don't think I'd be here now." My mother patted Anita Sanderson on the hand. "Well, you're here now, dear, safe and well, and that's all that matters. That thing cannot hurt you now." At this point, I was quick to interject into the conversation. "But I don't understand, Mrs. Sanderson. Why this beast didn't catch up with you. I mean, this thing probably has night vision and is nimble on his feet, as you say. If you really believe it was after you, then why didn't it get you? Maybe it didn't intend to hurt you after all. Maybe it just wanted to scare you. But you say it was stopped. What do you exactly mean by that, Mrs. Sanderson?" "That's it, Ernest. That thing would have got me if it hadn't been for the Bigfoot. I know you're going to think that this part of my story is crazy, as my night was full of all kinds of surprises, let me tell you. For a start, I never believed that creatures like Bigfoot even existed, until I saw one. And this thing was monumental in size. He blew my mind, he was so large. I'm not sure if the Bigfoot actually meant to intervene on my behalf, but the wolfman was screaming when it grabbed him, and the Bigfoot was throttling him and thrashing his body against a tree. I doubt the wolfman that was following me could have actually survived that attack. You see, the Bigfoot towered over him. He was strapping and powerful, and the wolfman that chased me was no match compared to him." At this startling revelation in Anita's story, that was becoming weirder and weirder by the second, me, my mother, and my brother were giving each other rather funny looks, because her story was becoming increasingly far-fetched. "Bigfoot," I said with a cheeky grin. "Mrs. Sanderson, are you making this up? I'm sorry, but I don't buy Bigfoot's are real. I almost believed you about the wolfman, but the Bigfoot, no, that's stretching things way too far." "Mrs. Sanderson is not making this up, son," said my father, leaping at once to Anita's defence. "She's telling you the truth. Bigfoots are real. I know this because I've seen a Bigfoot myself, when I was round and about your age. So don't be dismissive about cryptid creatures, because I assure you they do exist." At this paradoxical comment coming from my father, that took us all by surprise, all went very quiet in the kitchen, as we all just looked at each other incredulously, as if my father's words had hit us like a jolt of electricity, and our safe little paradigms of the world had been cruelly shattered in a single instant, as if we suddenly had to rethink our entire view on things. My father was a quiet man by nature, who never lied a single day in his life, and for him to say cryptid creatures were real, then how could I doubt him for a second? In that moment my scepticism turned into belief, and a burgeoning sense of excitement began to take root inside of me. Because now what Mrs. Sanderson was revealing to us no longer seemed like fictitious mumbo-jumbo. Her words had become credible. If my father, a man of such noble character, believed her story, then so did I. "Mrs. Sanderson," I asked, "what happened with the Bigfoot? You say he attacked the wolfman that was chasing you. Is that right?" "That's right, Ernest. The wolf creature was chasing me, running after me, at such a rapid pace. At one point I fell over a gnarled root, you see, thrust up through the earth like a treacherous claw. I grazed my knees and twisted my ankle. The pain was excruciating, let me tell you. My ankle was throbbing. I tried to get to my feet, and that was when I heard the wolfman getting closer to me. And with my ankle in such pain, well, I actually thought I was a goner, didn't I? All of a sudden I heard this ear-piercing scream coming from behind me, and I was certain it came from the wolfman, because he was getting close to me and was about to pounce on me in any second. I grabbed a broken branch from the ground that I could use as a defensive weapon to fight him off, as my ability to run was dramatically impaired by now. My ankle was barely able to support my body weight. The pain I was feeling was tremendous, and we all know how a wounded animal is easy pickings. So I thought it was over cadovers for me, I really did. But I was too overcome with terror to even pray. I turned around for a second to face my opponent, and at this point I was determined to fight with everything in me, because what else did I have to lose? But that was when I saw the Bigfoot, and that was when I realized the wolfman had been ambushed by the Bigfoot and was screaming in terror. It wasn't because the wolfman wanted to pounce on me. It was because the wolfman himself had been pounced on. It was the kind of ear-piercing sound you'd expect to hear if a woman was being murdered. That was how that wolfman was screaming. So you're saying a Bigfoot apprehended and attacked the wolfman that was chasing you? I said again. That's exactly what happened, Ernest. The Bigfoot grabbed the wolf-like humanoid, as if it weighed no more than a feather, and then he thrashed this wolf creature against the tree so very hard. Everything went quiet. I remember even the crickets and frogs stopped singing. I think the wolf-like creature was dead. He was swinging from the Bigfoot's arms like a pendulum. There was blood absolutely everywhere, all over the tree trunk, scattered liberally all over everything. I stood there staring at the Bigfoot in bemusement. He stared back at me for a while. Neither of us made any sound. I'm not exactly sure how long we stared at each other for. I was so frozen. I was literally unable to move. The Bigfoot then roared at me, and I heard in my head, "Go! Go!" And I came here. But even as I ran directly to your farmhouse with a throbbing ankle that was killing me, let me tell you, I was very scared the wolfman would somehow gain traction again, raise himself from the dead, so to speak, because it's hard to explain this to you. But he looked so demonic. Like, like a creature you'd expect to find in hell, I suppose. And so, I don't know whether the thing was supernatural, but it definitely was real. I mean, it was eating that chicken outside my kitchen door. So it was real. But there was something so supernatural about it at the very same time. It's very hard to explain, of course. So you think the Bigfoot protected you? Protected you from this wolf man? I asked excitedly. I don't know the answer to that, Ernest. I wish I did. I mean, the Bigfoot told me in my head to go at once. I think he killed the wolf-like humanoid, but I was so terrified. I wasn't sure if the Bigfoot was benevolent or not. So when he told me to go, well, I did just what he asked. And I just walked back to your house, or ran back, on the most painful ankle imaginable. But I ran through the pain, and I got here. Well, I sincerely hope, Mrs. Sanderson, that werewolf-like creature you saw is dead. I hope it can't come back to life. Oh, I'm quite sure he is dead, said my father very confidently. I think that coming up against a Bigfoot like that would have sealed the deal for him. He wouldn't have stood a chance. That night, or perhaps I should more correctly say, in the early hours of the morning, after we'd been rudely awoken from our slumber by a very affrighted Mrs. Sanderson, after much reassurance on my mother's part, she managed to prepare the woman a spare bed in our house for the night. The following morning, she was in a much better frame of mind, even though she was very much on edge, always looking nervously towards the wood grove. My father quickly drove her home for her to get some extra clothes, and of course to get Badger her dog, and then she and Badger stayed in our farmhouse for the next few days, until finally her husband returned from his trip to the agriculture fair. Me and my brother William were naturally intrigued and incredibly curious about Mrs. Sanderson's rather paradoxical story, and naturally, like any inquisitive teenager with an inquiring mind, we ventured into the woods that morning, to see if we could see for ourselves any telltale signs of the drama that unfolded the previous night. We wanted to make sense of Mrs. Sandalson's story in some way. When we entered the wood grove, me and my brother started searching frantically for signs of a scuffle, blood on a tree perhaps, pieces of hair caught in a bramble bush, anything that could validate Mrs. Sandalson's nonsensical story, as we wanted some kind of proof that what she claimed happened really was authentic. My father had affirmed that creatures like this existed, and his revelations the previous night had made my spine all but tingle with the thrill of my intrigue, for the possibility that creatures like this existed had made our somewhat humdrum lives become infinitely more thrilling. I wondered why my father had kept his knowledge of Bigfoot being real so cloak and dagger, but he had leapt to Mrs. Sandalson's defence immediately when we had started to doubt her far-fetched story. Me and my brother, one way or another, wanted to get my father to talk about his encounter. I'm afraid to say my father, for as long as I've known him, has never been terribly forthcoming about much. It seemed almost insane to me and my brother that a story like this had happened so close to home, with Mrs. Sandalson, I mean. We were champing at the bit to have a story of our own. I imagined what it would be like to tell my friends at school that I'd actually seen a wolf man or a Bigfoot, and I knew they would believe me, as like my father, I seemed incapable of lying, and I was always teased for being so incessantly honest. Me and my brother were typical teenagers, of course, that loved exploring, and we were naturally curious by nature. We were exceedingly fascinated by the things going on around us. We were passionate about horror stories on TV, and loved being scared half to death, for it was a thrill to us. If cryptid creatures like Bigfoot were real, we wanted to see a Bigfoot for ourselves, with our own naked eye. The trouble with the natural world is that she's very good at keeping secrets and hiding evidence behind a veil of foliage, so that anything that has been disturbed the night before has a way of remaining hidden. When me and my brother searched the wood grove, it was as if anything that had happened only hours ago had somehow been sandblasted away. It was in that quintessential moment I wished with all my heart that I was a tracker, as people who can read the terrain, like you and I can read a book, can easily discern the disturbances in the natural fauna and flora that few of us would ever be able to pick up, unless we were trained to read the natural terrain in the way a tracker so obviously can. The wood grove on this magnificent Saturday morning was flooded with wisps of pretty sunshine that trickled through the trees and washed the forest in a soft ethereal light. But it looked as it always did. It seemed benevolently benign. And if what had happened the previous night with Mrs. Sandalson had been lost, then there was no chance we could ever find any evidence of her story. The wood grove was resolutely giving nothing away, like a stubborn brother or sister that refuses to include you in their secret. Even the birds tweeting cheerfully in the forest canopy did not display any sense of disquiet, and the cheerful tunes that filtered through the trees spoke of a day that was much like any other. We started to look for some blood on the ground, until our eyes grew tired and weary, and our resolve waned. I mean, let's not kid. If the Bigfoot had thrashed the wolf-like humanoid against the tree and probably killed it, surely there would be some evidence of it. I rightly assumed there had to be some blood somewhere. It was at this point that my brother, who was beginning to lose heart, began to kick furiously at the fallen leaves and foliage on the forest floor. He was becoming frustrated that our search had been so fruitless, and just as we were about to give up on our intrepid exploration of the woods, that was when we saw the revealing red droplets of blood on a tree trunk, and some spilled on the fallen leaves on the forest floor. For a moment me and my brother were lost for words as we observed the rather macabre scene, like two dry sponges soaking up the moisture of this new information. We both stood there, staring at each other, because it was hard to believe we had stumbled on this extraordinary find. This must be where it had all happened, I told my brother. This must be where the Bigfoot whacked the wolfman against the tree. It did happen. It had to have happened. It was at that point my brother uttered the words, "Bloody hell!" as that was all my brother ever said when he couldn't find any other words to express his extreme astonishment. My brother was pointing to something big that looked like a long piece of rolled-up dark carpet lying on the ground. "What's that?" he asked me. He then pushed the thing over with the back of his boot. So it rolled over, and in this dishevelled, hideously big rag-like thing that was soaked with blood, we observed a human-like body, covered in hair, which had the face and features of a wolf. We discovered we were looking at the deceased, decomposing body of what appeared to be a very strange creature that was half man and half wolf. The body was rapidly descending into decay and smelt really rank and disgusting, as Mrs. Sanderson had said. The creature had 2 rows of teeth, was very emaciated, and had a long, thick tail. We stared at each other incredulously, and then ran back to the house as fast as we possibly could, our hearts pounding violently in our chests, our breasts raspy. We wanted to tell my father about our weird find, but when we returned to the woods again with my father at our side, the deceased corpse of the wolfman was nowhere to be found, and we began to search high and low for it, but it had mysteriously all but disappeared, which in itself was exceedingly weird. "Dad, I promise you it was there," said my brother, insistently, his eyes growing wide. "Look at the tree over there. The trunk's got blood all over it. That's where it happened. The body was lying over there. It looked like a rolled-up piece of carpet. I promise you, it really was over there." "I believe you, son. But the body is gone now. There's nothing we can do about it. Let's go back to the house, shall we, and forget this ever happened. I'm afraid Mrs. Sanderson had a terrible shock last night. But if it makes both you boys feel any better, it's very unusual for lightning to strike in the same place twice. I don't want you boys living your lives with angst, because I'm quite sure that the woods are perfectly safe. They certainly feel so." It must have been 2 days later that over the dinner table my mother was going on and on about poor Mrs. Sanderson. "She's not in a good way, you know," she told my father. "But then I wouldn't expect her to be. She had such a terrible shock. Of course, her husband doesn't believe a word of her story. He said she was as drunk as a skunk and was obviously hallucinating and seeing things that weren't really there. I feel so desperately sorry for the woman. There's something so terribly frustrating about not being believed, especially by your own husband. She was telling me she wished she hadn't shared her story with him, because he keeps shaking his head and saying he wished she didn't drink so much when he was away. He does believe, of course, that a fox got into the chicken coop, but he doesn't believe a word of his wife's story about the wolf man. Not a word of it. He says it's all just nonsense." "Well, can you blame him, darling?" said my father. "The man's very cynical, isn't he? And Anita Sanderson made no secret of the fact that she drank a lot that night. She told us herself. She gets nervous living in a large, creepy house that makes a whole lot of noise when she's alone. I gather she always drinks to help her go to sleep. And if I was wearing her husband's shoes and had not had an experience with a cryptid creature myself, I would be as doubtful as Anita's husband obviously is. He believes it's all blown out of proportion. I'm just fortunate because I know Bigfoots are real. So when Anita told us her story, I didn't doubt it for a second. You saw yourself how affrighted she was. I don't know if you noticed, but she did smell of alcohol that night. So it isn't surprising her husband believed it was the drink talking. He even phoned me up to apologize for Anita waking us up at a god-awful hour of the morning. He told me that he absolutely believed that a fox had got into their chicken coop, but that his wife had overreacted and suddenly believed a monster was chasing her through the woods. He said she gets frightened when she's in the house alone and gets scared for no reason at all. She always gets pent up when she's home alone in that big old farmhouse." "Scared?" said my mother. "Is that what he calls it?" She was unable to hide the obvious sarcasm in her voice. "I think Anita Sanderson was a whole lot more than scared, don't you think? The woman was absolutely terrified. I very much doubt drinking too much alcohol is suddenly going to make you see Bigfoot. Why is that impossibly stubborn husband of hers literally refusing to believe a word his wife is telling him? What about our boys? They found the wolfman's body in the woods. Couldn't they tell Mr. Sanderson that his wife's story is true? I mean, they saw the creature themselves that gave her chase. The body is long gone, darling, said my father. Besides, it's really none of our business, is it? We shouldn't interfere into other people's affairs, so to speak. Anita's husband doesn't believe a word of her story, and there's not a jot we can do about it, and we should leave it be. The poor, poor woman, said my mother. I've advised her to go and see a trauma counsellor, you know. The whole event has terrified her. She's afraid that there may be more of these wolfmen around. She doesn't know whether the Bigfoot she encountered imposed a threat to her or not. So she's also afraid of the Bigfoot. She said he was monstrously huge. You worry too much, darling, about so many things. I'm quite sure Anita Sanderson is going to be fine, said my father reassuringly. When you've had a shock, it takes a long while to heal and adjust to what has happened. But sooner or later you reach acceptance, and then the healing can be quite rapid. How do I know? Because it happened to me. Darling, said my mother, looking up at my father through her dark, inquiring eyes, how long have we been married exactly? What a strange question for you to ask, darling. You can do the math, can you not? We have been married for 24 years, I'll have you know. And all this time you have never once told me about your encounter with a Bigfoot. All this is news to me. What secrets have you been keeping from me, darling? Keep your hair on. It's not like that, sweetheart. You know I don't keep secrets from you. The idea is absolutely ridiculous. Well, I'm sorry, darling, but I beg to differ on that. You always told me and reassured me that there were no secrets between us. And then I find out that you had an experience with a Bigfoot when you were a boy that I knew nothing about. Mum's right, Dad, I interjected. Why haven't you told us about your encounter? Because it's not something I want to talk about. I try to put it in the back of my mind. I don't regard it as a secret. I regard it as something I would rather not talk about. There is a very big difference. Well, you're not going to do that any more, darling, because I'm not leaving the dinner table until you tell me what happened to you. If you say these things are real, we want to hear your story, don't we, boys? Me and my brother nodded rather lamely, while my heart felt as if it was tightly wedged in my chest, as I was certain my father would fob us off and tell us he didn't want to talk about his paradoxical experience. But he surprised us all when he got up from the dining-room chair somewhat stiffly and said, Well, I'm not going to sit at the dining-room table to tell you the story. I need to sit somewhere comfortable. The living room will do nicely. I'll sit on one of those sofa chairs. If I'm going to tell you a story, I might as well do it in style. I'll need some hot chocolate with plenty of brandy in it, though. Well, we can do that, said my mother. I tell you what, I'll make some hot chocolate to go around for all of us, and then you can tell us your story, darling. Me and my brother looked at each other in disbelief. My father was going to share his story with us. I could hardly believe it, as getting anything out of my father was tantamount to extracting blood out of a stone. The fact that he was willing to share something with us about his encounter with a Bigfoot made me feel as if all my Christmases had come at once. Me and my brother William exchanged a secret high-five between each other and settled down in a couch opposite my father, our eyes pinned on him. Before long my mother appeared in the living room with a jiggling tray of mugs, all containing steaming cups of hot chocolate, with cream on the top and plenty of marshmallows. Alongside that, she had presented a plate of chocolate brownies for us to enjoy. For a long while we sipped our hot chocolates in silence, and me and my brother developed cream moustaches above our lips while we licked them away. No one had touched the plate of chocolate brownies, which was a first, as right now our undivided interest was in hearing my father's outlandish story. My father finally finished his hot chocolate, in which my mother had put a large measure of brandy. He let out a deep, contented sigh, and then sat back on the chair. "Well, where do I start?" he said. "I don't exactly consider myself the very best storyteller, but I'll try anyway." "Well, you don't have to embellish anything, darling," said my mother. "Not that that would ever happen to you, of course. You could never be accused of embellishing anything. Just tell us what happened. That's all we want to know. We're extremely interested, aren't we, boys?" Me and my brother said nothing, but we nodded in silence, waiting with bated breath for my father to continue with his story. My father drew in a deep breath, rubbed his moustache rather soberly, and then said, "It happened when I was about 16 years old, I suspect. My brother Gareth experienced it too. He also witnessed the Bigfoot that night." My mother's eyes almost popped out of her head, for she knew that unlike Dad, Uncle Gareth was one of the most talkative, outgoing and gregarious people you could ever hope to meet, while my father was so reticently reserved compared to his brother. The fact that Uncle Gareth hadn't told any of us about this bizarre encounter of his was nothing short of extraordinary, for if there was anything to talk about, Gareth invariably would be out with it. He was a hairdresser, and realised he was gay when he was about 21 years old. Gareth would talk to his customers at the hairdressing salon he managed about everything and nothing. His female clientele naturally loved him, plying him with generous gifts and inviting him on extravagant holidays. He was effusive and expressed himself with dramatic gestures, calling everybody he knew darling. So the fact that he hadn't mentioned this Bigfoot encounter to us, or anyone else for that matter, was nothing short of astonishing. He was extremely close with my mother. They were the best of friends. And he would sometimes rock up at our front door and say things like, "Darling, you are not going to believe what happened today. Oh my goodness, you're not going to believe it." My mother would invite him into the house, and over coffee and cake, Gareth would prattle away to his heart's content, as if his life depended on it. He was artsy and creative in so many ways, and always wore trendy, fashionable clothes. He looked uncannily like George Michael when he was young. So for Gareth to keep a story about a Bigfoot encounter hidden, especially from my mother, was baffling to say the very least. "Gareth knows about this?" my mother asked. This time she looked more than a little bewildered. "You've got to be joking. Your brother tells me absolutely everything. There's nothing he would keep from me. Why would he keep a Bigfoot encounter from me, for goodness sake?" "Of course he knows about this, love," my father said. "We experienced our Bigfoot encounter together, so I would think he would know about it, don't you? He was part of the experience." "But I don't understand," said my mother. She looked as if someone had just slapped her across the face with an ice-cold hand. She seemed confounded. "But me and Gareth, we're so very close. I just don't understand why he wouldn't share this with me. It's so unlike him. Gareth loves to shock people all the time. You know, he's so controversial like that. Why wouldn't he tell me something like this?" My father stroked his moustache reflectively. "Gareth may be an outgoing person, but what happened to the both of us that night is not something he has ever spoken about to anyone. In fact, after the experience, he said he didn't want to talk about it ever again. I guess we were both extremely rattled by what happened. He was absolutely terrified for weeks after the event. I remember he had terrible, terrible nightmares. And he even wet his bed a couple of times, and that had never happened before. He said he didn't want to think about it anymore. So I guess he just stashed that memory away and tried his damnedest to forget about it. And frankly, I can't blame him for that." "Was he worried no one would believe him? Is that it?" my mother asked. "He thinks people will laugh at him, perhaps, for suggesting that Bigfoot exists." "Well, there is that too, I suppose," my father admitted. "But when you've had a scare that has shaken you so hard, even the most garrulous of people, especially people like Gareth, may not be so forthcoming. And I would appreciate it, darling, when you see him next, that you make no mention of this to him. He would not appreciate me talking about this with any of you." "Was it really that bad, what happened to you?" my mother asked. "Were you as scared as what Mrs. Sanderson was the other night?" "Of course we were scared, love. We were petrified. We were teenagers at the time. Do you want to hear my story or not? Because if you keep asking all these questions, we won't get anywhere, will we?" "Very well," said my mother. "Please go on." "Well, where was I? Let's start at the beginning, shall I? Much like you two teenagers," said my father, looking over at me and William. "Gareth and I spent a lot of our time together. One of our favourite pastimes was to explore. We were inquisitive by nature, as most teenagers our age were. There was an old abandoned house that belonged to the Erickson family, and still does as far as I know. They abandoned the place, and it's still like that today. Even though they own it for some reason, they've never sold it. But there you go. People can be profoundly strange. My mother, your grandmother, told us that one day the Erickson family just up and left their house for no reason, and no one heard a dicky bird from them, although I understand they kept in touch with their solicitors, so the house remains in the family name. But they don't appear to want to sell up, which is strange, as the land alone could still fetch a pretty penny." "I know the house you're talking about, Dad. It's a pink house," I said. "The paint is now peeling, and the wraparound porch is disintegrating. The wood has rotted. The house is practically buried behind long grass and tall, lofty trees. Why hasn't anyone sold it? It pretty much has descended into decay. William and I went there once to look at the place. The house is empty. Everything is overgrown. I'm sure it was a stunning house at one time, though." "Well, what you say, son, is perfectly true. The house is still abandoned today, and at one point in time it was very stylish. The Ericksons were reasonably wealthy, so I guess they kept the property in the family name, never bothered to sell it, because they had so much money. But as to why they never sold it is the $100 question that still mystifies me today." So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.